In this video, I will demonstrate how you can use the Type tool to create a text portrait in Adobe Photoshop. For this tutorial, it doesn't have to be a portrait of somebody or something. It really can be of any object you would like, but it does help if that object stands out from its background. This first step is optional, but if you would like your text size to match mine, go to Image, Image Size, and set the height and width of your image somewhere under 8.5 by 11, but your numbers don't have to match mine. I do suggest having the resolution at 300 and click OK. Click Command + or - to resize your image to your screen. And then over in your toolbar, locate your Quick Selection tool. If you click and hold on that tool, these options come up and we'll use the Object Selection tool. This tool is a bit new in Photoshop, so make sure your software is up to date. And then select your subject matter by clicking and dragging out a bounding box on top of it, or you can come up here and click Select Subject. Then Photoshop will add these dotted lines, known as marching ants, around what it thinks is the subject of your picture. Notice that it missed a little bit of the cat's ear, so you can come up to the control panel and add to your selection, subtract from your selection, or intersect with that selection. I want to add to the selection, so I'll choose this icon, and I can do that with either a rectangle again or using the lasso tool. I'll show you the rectangle first, so you can just draw out another rectangle over the missing part, and now it's been added to the selection. Switching to the lasso tool, you can click and draw a lasso around the missing area that you would like to add. It's a little bit more precise than the rectangle selection tool. But I'll now show you my favorite way to refine the selection. Go back to the Quick Selection tool icon, click and hold, and choose the Quick Selection tool. Again, in the control panel, you can add or subtract to your selection, and in this dropdown, you can adjust the brush settings. I'll zoom in a bit, and now I'll use the minus brush to subtract. You can also use the bracket keys on your keyboard as a shortcut to changing the size of your brush. But if you accidentally subtract too much, you can use Command or Control Z to undo. Now I'll fine-tune the edges around its ear. You can also hold the Alt or Option key to switch between the adding and subtracting brushes. This step is optional, but to make sure you have enough coverage, go up to Select, Modify, Expand, and the number of pixels you enter here will depend on the size of your image, so I'll try 10. And watch the marching ants as I click OK, and you'll see that it just expanded them a tiny bit to make sure I have good coverage. This can be really helpful if your subject has hair or fur, for example. Then come up to the control panel and click on Select and Mask, which will bring up this workspace. Over on the right, you can change how you're viewing this selection. In this drop-down, you have many choices, but my favorite is Overlay. It helps me see the edges more clearly, but yours doesn't have to look like mine. In the control panel, you again have plus and minus signs using this Quick Selection tool, and you can also change the size, reselect the subject, and refine the hair. So this is just another screen that helps you refine your edges. Over in the right panel, you have some additional fine-tuning options. You don't have to use these, but I'll quickly walk through them. Under Refine Mode, you can choose the Color Aware mode for contrasting backgrounds and the Object Aware mode, good for hair or fur on complex backgrounds. Under Edge Detection, you can change the radius, a higher radius for softer edges, a lower one for sharp edges. Click this box for Smart Radius, which helps if you have a subject with both sharp and soft edges. Under Global Refinements, you have a Smooth slider to reduce irregular areas for a smoother outline, Feather, which blurs the transition between your selection and its background, Contrast, which makes soft-edged transitions more abrupt, and Shift Edge, which moves the soft-edged borders inward or outward. This can help remove unwanted colors around the edges. Under Output Settings, you have Decontaminate Colors, which replaces colors on the fringes of your selection with the color of fully selected pixels, but the full effect depends on the softness or sharpness of your edges. This just helps avoid any background color sneaking in. Finally, you do have to make this choice. you have options of how to output your selection. And I always like outputting my selection to a new layer with a layer mask. And click OK. Back in your main screen, you'll see that it's added a new layer with a layer mask thumbnail, and your image's background has been masked. Come down to the bottom of that panel and click the plus sign to add a new layer. And you'll see that new layer added in your Layers panel. With it selected, come over to your toolbar and click on the Paint Bucket tool, which is nested underneath the Gradient tool. So if you don't see this paint bucket, find the Gradient tool icon, click and hold on it, and the paint bucket should be nested below it. Use this square to choose a color for your background, and I'll just keep it black. And then with the Paint Bucket tool, click, and it will fill in that layer with a solid color. Over in your Layers panel, click and hold on that colored layer and drag it below the layer with your image and its mask. So now your subject matter has a colored background. Next, you'll add text. So in a Word or Google Doc, type out your text and spell check it. It could be a list of random words, a paragraph, a poem, but know that some of the words may get cut off in your image. Select all of the text. You can highlight it by clicking Command or Control A, and then copy the text by clicking Command or Control C on your keyboard. Go back to your Photoshop document and click on the horizontal type tool in the toolbar. Click at the top of your image and drag out a bounding box to the opposite corner. Let go and then paste your text into that box. You can click Command or Control V. Over in your Layers panel, you'll see that you now have a type layer. Click, hold, and drag that layer to the top of your Layers panel. With that layer selected, double-click into the text to highlight it, or click Command or Control A. Then you can make changes to your text with the options in the Control panel. For instance, in this drop-down, you can change the size of the text. And because my cat is to the right of my picture plane, I like how it looks with the text being aligned to the right, but you can make any choices you would like. Fine-tune the spacing of your text with the Character panel. Click either its icon in the Control panel or go up to Window Character to bring up the panel. You can make any adjustments here to the formatting of your text. One thing you might want to do is adjust the leading with this drop-down, which is the amount of space between the lines of type. You don't want them too far apart or too close together. And another option is this icon for tracking, which is the space between the letters. You might want the text to read a bit randomly. So if it lines up like this, and this is not the look you're going for, tracking can help change that. Once you have your text formatted, go into your Layers panel and move the type layer below the layer with your image and clipping mask. Then, with the layer of the image and clipping mask selected, right-click on that layer and choose Create Clipping Mask. Now the text is over your object. Those steps can be a bit tricky, so I'll repeat. The image layer needs to be above the text layer. You select the image layer, right-click on it, and choose Create Clipping Mask to bring the text on top of your image. Now you can either leave it like this, which I think looks pretty good, or you can select all of the type again, and with it all highlighted, click this box in your Control panel to bring up the Color Picker panel, and change the color of your text to match the background, which in my case is black, and click OK. Now when you click off the text, it fades into the background and only shows up on your subject, which also looks pretty good. I'll zoom in and show you some options that can help your image stand out more or blend in more, depending on your liking. Click on the Adjustment panel, and if you don't see this panel, go to Window Adjustments. One of the options you can pick here is this icon for hue and saturation. And you can make your image, for example, black and white by bringing down the saturation. Oops, but for it to make an impact, it needs to be on top of the layer. So in the Layers panel, click and move the hue saturation layer to the top, and now you'll see it's turned my image of the cat into black and white. And you can play around with the other adjustments to make any changes you would like to your image. Now, this text portrait style might not best showcase your subject. Since this cat has a lot of neutrals and dark shadows, she gets lost within the text. If this is your case, all is not lost. Select all the text with Command or Control A, and then click this rectangle in the control panel to bring up the color picker, and try a different color, say white, and click OK. Then in the Layers panel, select the layer with the image and clipping mask. Right-click on it and choose Release Clipping Mask. Mine isn't showing up because I clicked something else and it released the mask before. But once you release the clipping mask, your subject matter will now be in front of the text, and this also makes for a really cool text portrait. And again, I have the hue and saturation layer, and I can remove the saturation to turn the cat black and white if I want. The last option I want to show you is to add some effects to your text. So with the type layer selected, come down to the FX icon, click on the blending options to bring up the layer style panel. Click on the square here to bevel and emboss your text. You can also adjust the opacity of the text, and there are a lot of options here to choose from. I'm not going to go over them all, but I encourage you to experiment and see what you like best. Remember, if you want to adjust each layer style specifically, double-click on the text next to the checkbox to bring up its panel. And when you're done, click OK. And this looks great. So now it's time to save your work. Go to File, Save As, and I'll save this in my Creative Cloud file in a folder for this class. I rename it my first name, last initial, _ This is Unit 02.3 Text Portrait, and I'll save it as a Photoshop document, clicking Save, and then go up to File, Save As, and change the format to a JPEG for my web page. And that is how you create a text portrait in Adobe Photoshop.